Yeah, so really quickly, how would you describe very briefly to a Hmong person in Hmong what autism is? Because I think that would help us mental
Yeah,
health therapists too, who are maybe working with a parent, right, who has a
yeah,
child who's autistic.
yeah. So you want me to explain it in Hmong or the way that I would explain it, but talk
Yeah,
about it in English?
explain it in Hmong so we know.
Okay.
Because I you
Yeah.
you did a very great
Yes.
job explaining it in English, but
Yes.
how would we translate that into Hmong, like so
Yes.
people understand?
Yeah, that's a good one. Very good one. And it's not perfect. And I'm always
Yeah,
like looking for ways to do this, right?
right,
I
right.
will, yep. So the way that I talked about it in English, that's the way that I would talk about it in Hmong. So I will
Mhm.
say that autism na ni yo ít có ít giờ giảm的 you lose, okay? So that's first. So you lose những giờ mình chỉ, okay? Đó là có giờ nên đó chỉ là được có kiến chế, là có cái nữ lúc bình sự ấy nữ tàu na. So not cognitive or intellectual. Okay, họ họ tự trả lần đó là幫助họ nữ達到努力度，就是nữ this is where I have a challenge. So yeah, the geisha total geisha shia for Beijing Mona, we have this word where you had to show on the phone them down.
Yeah,
Okay, so what that means is you don't have to say a lot, but they could pick up on
yeah.
the nuances of the language and the culture to kind of put those pieces together. Beijing
Mhm.
mình có autism na, you usually pull lung chia to lo. Okay, you have to be very clear
Mhm.
and be very straightforward. You hay đó chi nó là you trái kia chứ chính kia mình là thêm mi
Right.
bao. You
Mhm.
hay chứ chứ you sa gọi là bao nên lợi dụng bao từ là từ kinh gọi là bao nên tao rồi na. That's just not going to work with our kids with
Mhm.
autism. You
Right.
trái bia here, you trái not just 破论 GS，但是 you have to 别做人啊，别下啲要特別我哋攞嚟個比例攞，睇有時睇特大啦，亦都唔用到睇你包，因為睇特大亦都唔用到they're gonna get lost, they're not gonna follow along, or they're gonna get confused about why that might be. So for example, right, 因為亦都唔用啊you behave a certain way. You can't okay, you don't you usually be a certain way, right? You have to
Mhm.
be very proper. And then you you could be whoever you are, right?
Mhm.
That's very confusing, and so you're going to have to explain, especially, and we do that a lot more. In general, everyone does that, but in the Hmong culture, we do that a lot more. The expectation of our kids to be proper out in the
Right.
community, right? To
Mhm.
save face and whatnot. So things like that, we have to be very clear cut. Like we have to be more explaining why we do that, because they're not going to understand why we do that. Like it's going to be
Mhm.
confusing, sending mixed messages. So yeah, so I do talk about that. I do talk about sensory and restrictive interests. So I talk about
Mhm.
all the symptoms, right? So when
Right.
it comes to sensory, I give them the back story because I can't expect them, most people know what sensory sensitivities are. Okay, so I
Mhm.
go back to the basics of yeah, you both you lose environment you in the you know you both you in TV you bought you more you bought you more on you know you could taste, right?
Yeah.
You right. So I go through all the senses and then I
Yeah.
say, okay, don't make me more autism now. Lỡ Bây giờ ấy bé nó, like example, bây giờ ấy bé nó na, chúng con đi nữ tứ chỉ thông chế là tứ chỉ được đó na, tất chỉ đâu lỡ mà nữ lỡ nó ít nhiều giờ cho na, bây giờ
Mhm.
ấy tứ chỉ chúng con đi những cái normal, tôi bé sinh ra là đâu lỡ mà chúng con đi think rõ lỡ na, okay,
Mhm.
so ô tô lỡ nhỏ chỉ tông được hoạt chân tàu là xí lỡ cho lại bỏ bón chê lỡ lỡ bây giờ
Yeah.
lên tới này so I do talk about some of those sensory sensitivities, and that's the way that I talk about it, giving them the psychoeducation and then filling in, so like give with examples of what that might look like if they were to have sensory sensitivities. And I do the same thing with rigidities,
Mhm.
explaining that usually don't learn um, don't lỡ do ở chỉ bảo cái số lượng trong của những nhau đâu lỡ lỡ qua chỉ tàu lên tàu lỡ lúc lưới do lỡ tiền Ví dụ lên nó là na chỉ trong cái là lúc lúc chị lên tàu xưa na you
Mhm.
you mua con tàu bảo lợi nó chị trong cái mình sợ cho lợi là trong cái li ô cho lợi mình bảo tàu na chị lợi yo chủ lại they tiêu chị qua they tu chị
Yeah.
chia they have a reaction to it. So yeah,
Yeah.
so I know that wasn't really brief, but it isn't. It
That's
just
good.
can't be.
No, all of that is so good. I really appreciate that.